At the same time, what Pakistan has also gone through in the last few years because of climate change, because of it being one of the most vulnerable countries, despite being one of the least carbon emitters, is quite evident. We've highlighted that at COPs, and we highlighted that also to the IMF, and as a result, we have the RSF. Now, the RSF's climate resilient agenda, how does in your point of view, validate Pakistan's long-standing global position that it is amongst the most climate vulnerable nations, despite being the least carbon emitters, and deserves greater climate financing and international support in this very respect?
Yes, I fully agree with you that it entirely validates Pakistan's position. It is a total validation of that position. It's just that there are actors in the world that are not keen to accept that truth. Even if they see it, the writing is on the wall. Climate change is a reality, and some countries have very low per capita emissions like us, but we are disproportionately affected. They don't want to face that. They are tight-fisted. They don't want to accept the consequences of exploitative capitalism as it stands today. So I actually foresee indigenous changes here happening with the assistance of the international markets, importing as necessary, that will actually transform Pakistan's eco footprint in a much better way. So we have to do our part. For example, there are new hydro projects that are coming online over the next 2 to 3 years, big ones in the north. Then you have electric vehicle policy set out this year, and over the next 5 years we'll see how the station and the grid works on that. But if you have more electric vehicles, it'll be even better. And the third is the solarization, where it doesn't matter what the government says, the people have just put everything on their rooftops on their own. And it is one of the true miracles cited across the world for how society itself can start to solve problems. That is, I think, how we will have to face this reality. It is true that we are low per capita carbon emitters, but even in Pakistan, we have this smog effect. We have certain things to look at, emission standards, and we can do our part to make the earth more viable and more sustainable. And I think that is the best attitude. These international negotiations are corrupt because they are major petroleum, oil and gas companies. They are major polluting countries. They are not honest brokers in this. They won't give you your share. They have always taken from you. So you have to make a better world yourself.
All right, so you have to internalize all the situation and look at internal measures in order to stabilize your economy.
Yes.
This is what you're trying to say.
Exactly.
All right, Shehbaz, coming to you. Given the IMF's recognition of Pakistan's reforms as far as taxation is concerned, SOE governance is concerned, and energy restructuring is also concerned, in your point of view, how can the government convert this external confidence, despite the different challenges that it has and that you have also alluded to, into domestic economic momentum and political stability?
Before answering your question, I just want to add just one sentence on this climate part. Frankly speaking, our story has to go beyond the victim story. The world doesn't believe anymore the victim story, that we are much affected. Yes, we are affected by the climate change, but what are our measures? What are the policy choices that Pakistan has? So for getting the international funding for mitigating the impact of the climate change, we need to move beyond this victim story. Coming back to your question, the leverage, how to go from this point, the SOE's reform is an area where much needs to be desired and needs to be done by the government of Pakistan, and that is also reflected in the statement by the International Monetary Fund, as well as the letter of intent that the government of Pakistan has written to the IMF managing director while requesting the approval of these two loan tranches. There are few waivers that Pakistan has obtained from the IMF. Without those waivers,
All right, you've just muted, so we can't hear you anymore. Shehbaz, you'll have to unmute whatever you just, so that we can continue our conversation. Anyways, till such time that he does unmute his conversation and we continue with where we left off with Shehbaz. How does the government, or how should the government, Usman, plan to translate this IMF confidence that we've seen in the document into long-term structural reforms? We've discussed structural reforms many a times in the past as well in shows. Anyways, but the latest, under the current circumstances, how can we translate this IMF confidence into not short-term, but long-term structural reforms that can reduce Pakistan's dependency on external financing? This is what you were saying. This is what you alluded to in the last response as well. Look inwards.
Absolutely. I think the question also corresponds to what you asked Shehbaz Saab, that state-owned enterprises are a big part of this, that we have an expenditure thing, as was mentioned earlier, we have an expenditure that is extending into double digits, that we have a federal and provincial imbalance. These types of reforms are one aspect. The second aspect is a borrow-bust cycle, that after 2 years, as my eminent colleague said, there is this expectation in the public for more laxity, more growth-oriented policies, and every government, every single government in the past has surrendered to that and become given more largesse when it was not appropriate. Now, I think we have to basically stay the course. In order to make this IMF program more viable and more far-reaching in its positive consequences, we have to stay the course, which means austerity may last longer than in previous cycles. And at the same time, the tougher reforms have to be done. And SOEs, the government's footprint, the federal-provincial imbalance, this number of provinces, all of these questions can and should be put on the table, because for one thing, the generation that created these problems is now retiring. So these date back to the early 70s and the types of measures taken back. The people who came and the systems that were put in place are now expiring and retiring, and now there is a new generation that hungers for more optimal solutions based on what the world has learned in the last 50 years. It is time for those things to be put in, and also the bone-crushing intensity globally of this last inflationary spike has left room in countries like Pakistan to really look at how things can be solved. And you see this political will in our government, you see this openness. I think the best example is our finance minister, but there are other people who are also eager to make things better. So because of that, we actually can do it this time.
All right, we can actually do this time. Shehbaz, last question from you. We've taken a lot of your time. Coming to this IMF confidence and this IMF report, I mean, you've talked about some of the apprehensions that you have as far as the economic stability and certain decisions are concerned. But the IMF mandated austerity measures that the IMF wants Pakistan to undertake. How can the government, in your point of view, balance those with the need to protect the vulnerable segments of our society at the same time? How should this balance be maintained?
Austerity, I mean, there is no austerity in the system, if you honestly ask me. Whatever the fiscal consolidation is taking place, it is solely dependent on the increase in taxes from the same class of people and the companies. So austerity does not mean saving few papers, saving few stationery items. That is not austerity. Austerity would mean reducing the wastage of the public sector development program. Austerity would mean not spending in areas which under the constitution are the provincial subjects. So whatever the fiscal consolidation we are having right now, or even the highest primary budget surplus in years, was because of the increase in taxes. That came from the additional taxes imposed on the same class of people, into the salaried class and the corporate sector. So I would be happy that our expenditures are also reduced by the amount, by the percentage our tax to GDP ratio goes up.
All right, Shehbaz, thank you very much to have joined us. It was a pleasure having you on our show as always. Thank you very much again. Usman, what mechanisms in your point of view are also being put, because there's a whole digitization drive that is being put by the government of Pakistan as well. Do you feel this digitization process is also part of the measures as mandated by the IMF? In your point of view also, what kind of mechanisms should be put into place to ensure that this drive translates into enhanced revenue collection and reduce leakages, because that is why it was introduced in the first place?
Yes, well, a good case study of this is what the FBR is doing. The FBR gets a lot of criticism, but we must understand the burden that is put on them. And what the FBR has done is used various digital tools to identify the ability to pay, the tax avoidance and tax evasion and those sorts of behaviors quite effectively. And that is a good example of how you're using tools on the revenue collection side specifically. But digitization is one of the three things that I would recommend to improve our overall governance with a view to the economic recovery, like structural economic reform. The first being digitization, the second being localization, like local government, and the third being sorting out the transport and energy sectors. They're just so inefficient, they're so distortionary and such a big fiscal burden. If you do these three, Pakistan's economy will go up by leaps and bounds, and it's actually at the crux of whatever the IMF has recently said, because in governance, digitization makes it easy because it adds transparency, public service delivery and efficiency. Efficiency because it's very easy to do, transparency because the whole world can see it, and public service delivery because the consumer can easily access what they need from it. This is at the core of what we need, and it's one of the main things Pakistan can easily do, because it's the first quarter of the 21st century is over. Like being digital is a native thing.
That's so true, and we have to keep up with it. And of course, we are doing the right measures, and that is why the IMF is praising all those in its report. Thank you very much, Usman, to have joined us. Dr. Usman Chohan, ladies and gentlemen, joining us for this very important segment as far as economy is concerned, and I hope to see more of you in the coming days as well.